I think our biggest win at Mashwriter Capital up to today has got to be our Seven Brew story. In September, we had 50 stands open and we merged with a private equity firm out of New York. Talk about private equity out of New York. It sounds so scary, but I was so proud of our team.
Welcome to the Business Growth Masterclass, where business growth is made simple. I'm your host, Albert Gillespie.
And I'm your co-host, Kellen Ketchersid. Join us as we bring you stories from business leaders so you can learn from their wins, their losses, and everything in between.
Today's guest is Dr. Brooke Hobgood, and Brooke is a principal, president, and COO at Mashwriter Capital, a private investment firm in Lubbock, Texas. She's also a board-certified anesthesiologist, I got that out, and currently serves as the chair of the board of trustees for Lubbock Christian Schools. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Brooke Hobgood.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I am excited to have you. We have a decent amount of women on the podcast, but having a woman on the podcast is always a different wrinkle and a different perspective. And I've been excited to have you on here.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Okay. I listed out a long list of very high achieving different areas of your life. And so give me a lay of the land. What is a week in the life of Dr. Hobgood look like? What do you do for a living? What does that look like today?
Sure. I do think sometimes I confuse people a little bit with what I do. But my primary role is working at Mashwriter Capital. And my days can have a variety of different things that occur in them. Mashwriter Capital, so we are a private investment firm here in Lubbock. We invest our own capital, and we also, on an irregular basis, offer investment opportunities for investors in our community. And we have some of the bigger investments that you might have heard of that we've done. For instance, the Seven Brew coffee stands here in Lubbock. We open those, and we have 69 of those stands that are open now. Florida, Oklahoma, Colorado. We did have Colorado. We sold Colorado, but Central and West Texas. And so my day at Mashwriter Capital, my responsibility mostly is for the day-to-day operations, but it can consist of anything from listening to somebody pitch a new deal to us. It could be meeting with an investor, meeting with a banker. We had a banker in town all day yesterday. So really there's a lot of variety at Mashwriter Capital. And then occasionally I might have a day where I am taking care of some responsibilities for a small business that I own. I own a small business, a compounding pharmacy here in Lubbock called Ivy Specialty Compounding. So occasionally I take care of that too.
Okay, there is a lot on your plate here. And I'm like anesthesiologist and then like the operations guru at a capital firm. I'm like, okay, what is like your unique ability, like your unique gifts that you feel like how you can step into those very different roles?
That's a good question. I think, and I've reflected on this a lot because it is a very different transition to go from full-time practice of medicine to a private investment firm. And the skill set that makes you a really good anesthesiologist is when you can have an algorithm, when you can have a plan, when you can be well organized, and you can make decisions kind of in the moment. And so being in the operating room is a very controlled environment. You have to make sure that the decisions that you're making are best for the patient, that you're communicating clearly, and that you're ready at any moment if something might happen to go down an algorithm that might save a patient's life. And so while there's no lives on the line at Mashwriter Capital, what I am able to bring to the team is that organization formulating processes, talking through a plan, keeping us on track, and asking questions about, okay, this is where we want to be. How do we get there? And who do we put on the team in order to help us accomplish those goals?
Great answer. Okay, for further pulling the string on that, when I think of investment firms and I go to all these different conferences, it's like, I think of one in particular we go to that there's like 7,000 people and it's basically 98% white dudes in blue suits walking around.
Sure.
So a traditionally male dominated industry.
Sure.
How do you walk into that? How do you, bring your perspective and as a female lead in that? Like, how do you walk in with confidence and do that well? Can you kind of talk about, what that was like?
Yeah. In medicine, it's interesting. In my medical school and my residency classes, we really were 50-50 male, female. When I moved to Lubbock, I joined a small private anesthesia group, and it was 4 men, and I was the woman, and I was 15 to 20 years younger than them. And, it was really great. We had good synergy. I learned from their experience, and then I was able to bring some of the new experience that I had, teach them how to use tools that maybe they hadn't used previously. And so I think it was a really good relationship that we had. But really, it wasn't until I transitioned into business where I did feel like a lot of the rooms that I walked into were mostly men. And whether that was a bank meeting, whether that was a meeting with investors, whether it was individuals, organizations coming to pitch ideas to us or investment opportunities, a lot of times it was men. And I think for me, as a woman in those environments, you have to be willing to ask questions. If you don't understand something, ask it. A lot of times you're not the only person in the room. And I think that has helped me a lot, just to show like, hey, I don't know this, but I'm going to ask you to explain it to me. That way we're all on the same page and I know, and everybody else in the room knows too. So it hasn't been too much of a problem for me, but it is definitely a thing where there tends to be more men in this investment environment than women.
I appreciate the asking questions. That's my MO of, especially podcast guests, they'll talk in, some acronyms or vernacular. And I'm like, hang on.
What does that mean?
What is that? Yeah. What does that mean? Interpret that. Explain that to me like I'm 5. And I think there's vulnerability there.
Sure.
That, as a leader, if you can model vulnerability for people and show like you are human, you don't understand everything and you're working at this, in good faith, like everybody else. I think that's a sign of a good leader. And it can make people feel comfortable. We talk all the time with different entrepreneurs and leaders that they want to create this culture where it's okay to make a mistake.
Right.
And if a leader can't be vulnerable and admit they don't have all the answers, it's hard for your team to believe that, that's real,
Sure.
that's a real culture that you actually can make a mistake.
Right. And, I think good leaders, they don't always have all the answers. They don't always have all of the skills, but they have the ability to identify where they don't, where they lack knowledge or where they lack a skill set. And then they can go find individuals to fill those roles, whether it's for their volunteer organization, their for-profit organization, and make the company better as a whole.
Okay. So pulling on that string, like where did you learn that? You grew up in a entrepreneurial family. You had your dad on the podcast and he was one of my favorite interviews that we've done. And so can you talk a little bit about your upbringing and just being surrounded with that? And what were some lessons that you took from that? And what are some that you're like, you know what, I want to do that differently?
Sure. Yeah. So my dad, he is very entrepreneurial and always has been. And I think a lot of my entrepreneurial spirit probably stems from him and watching him. And as a kid growing up, you don't really know an environment outside of what you're growing up with. But things that he did that really impressed upon me, and now as an adult and as a professional, really were, his grit. I mean, I remember he was on the road a lot, and I remember his business. He would go and he would sell something, and then he would come back and he would read these huge books about coding, and he was going to figure it out. If there was a problem, and he knew he could come up with the solution and he could go sell it to a customer, or maybe he'd already sold it to the customer, he was going to do it. He was going to get it done because he said he was going to. And I remember witnessing that. And I also think his, and my mom's too, their integrity, their desire to adhere to the principles that they'd set for themselves and our family filtered into how they ran a business too, and the people that he hired and how he led and how they hosted their Christmas parties. And so I definitely saw that, even if I couldn't articulate it when I was younger. And so those are the types of things that I hope I can implement in my leadership opportunities as well.
Yeah. So grit and integrity, that is, as a dad,
Yeah.
I that's like what I want to teach my boys.
Sure.
Obviously, like I want to disciple my boys, and I want to get them to heaven. But aside from that, I'm a hammer looking for a nail, and I want them to understand grit and why it's important to do what you say you're going to do. And for us, we're in the sports stage
Yes.
right now, and trying to keep that in perspective. We had baseball tryouts last weekend, and all the pressure, all the conversations in the truck going to and from, and really, like, for us and for our family, sports is to learn grit, integrity, a growth mindset, and just seeing that modeled by your parents.
Mm-hmm.
It's yeah, you're in the truck and you're saying all the words, but when you're at the dinner table and you're watching your dad devour a 700-page coding book, that sits with you. And
Right.
I'm sure there's times or I'm sure in medical school, you were seeing your dad and yourself, or yourself and your dad, of like, all right, we got to get through this, and that's just what we do.
Sure. Yeah, I do see that in myself a lot where, I don't, you asked about confidence earlier. I know if I set my mind to something, I will get it done. And sometimes as a leader, that can be a little bit of a weakness, because I think, well, I'm just going to go do it because I'm going to get it done the way I want to get it done, instead of giving others the opportunity to succeed too and to accomplish something. But yeah, I've had a very similar level of determination and entrepreneurship that I saw him display as we were kids.
Okay, I loved that I'm gonna figure this out, because that's like a classic example of an entrepreneur who starts their own business,
Mm-hmm.
and it's this problem. I'm gonna figure it out. We're gonna get the job done. I'll pull myself up by my own bootstraps, and then you have to go to, okay, now I have to lead people, and
Right.
I have to empower people. I can't be the one who saves the day all the time. And I guess the question in here that I'm curious, you're a mom,
Yes.
and you have three. You have three.
Kids.
And how old are they?
I have a 14-year-old daughter, a 12-year-old daughter, and then my son is 11.
Okay. Two girls and a boy.
Yes.
How do you teach them that growth mindset? Like, what are some of the, I think of your dad, and now you and your sister, and like just the people that y'all are, and then how I've seen your kids act. I'm like, all right, I want to learn a little something here. So how do you model that? How do you teach that growth mindset to your kids?
My kids were very present when we were getting Mass Rider Capital up off the ground, and also when I started the pharmacy. Really, when I left the full-time practice of medicine, we were starting both of those businesses simultaneously. And so my kids saw it, and I tried not to shield the conversations from them. I I allowed them to see hey, do we do this or not? Starting the pharmacy, like, this is going to be expensive. Have we modeled this out appropriately? Do we feel like the customer base is there? Is the market there? They heard those conversations and they saw myself, and the other two co-founders that I had struggle with that. And I hope that when they look back and they watch that their mom started a business from ground up and started an investment firm, that they remember watching me make those decisions, and that when we're successful, they remember, oh yeah, but that was really hard in the beginning. You had to make some tough decisions and you had to risk in order to get to where you are now. So I just hope taking them along on the journey and letting them be part of it, they learn a lot from that.
That kids aren't dumb.
No.
Like you can try and hide the things. And my wife and I talk a lot about this of like, my parents fought all the time in front of everybody. Her parents, fought behind closed doors, and neither one of it, there's a balance there of like exposing your kids to challenges, to the grind, to having to see your grit. There's like a balance there. And if you can be, intentional with that, that's the job. Okay. You've talked about anesthesiology a couple of times here. And I gotta, like, that's not something you just like dabble in and then say, all right, I'm going to do the next thing. Okay. What originally let's start at the beginning here.
Yeah.
What drew you to anesthesiology, and, what did that career initially look like, and what made you, eventually make that leap to a different career?
So I knew I was going to be a physician since I was a kid, and I don't really know why. I think I knew I wanted to be the boss, and I didn't really know. And I knew I liked medicine and caring for people, and I didn't really.
Are you a firstborn?
Yes.
Okay. That makes sense. Go ahead.
Not shocked. Yeah. And so I thought I was going to be a pediatrician, and I went to medical school. And when I did my pediatrics rotation, I realized that the skill sets required to be a good pediatrician, they weren't really mine. It wasn't really what I wanted to do. And so then I went through this period of uncertainty and thought, oh no, now what do I do? And I really liked being in the operating room. And at Baylor College of Medicine, where I was, there were a lot of female anesthesiologists that I felt like were modeling the lifestyle that I wanted. They were married, they had kids. And in anesthesia, you get to be in the operating room, you get to have one patient at a time, take really great care of them, get to do some procedures, and then you went home when the day was done. And so that's the path that I chose. Then when we moved back to Lubbock, I joined that small group. There were 5 of us, and worked with them for about 2 or 3 years, and then left and staffed Lubbock Plastic Surgery Center when they built that facility and got it up off the ground. And I was there for about 7 or 8 years and was full-time there, attending anesthesiologists there. And I really loved it. It was great. It's a great work environment, great surgeons, great staff. But I got to the point where right before my oldest was about to start junior high, where I really was ready for something different. I was ready for a new challenge, a new chapter in my life. And I knew I wanted to start a business. I wanted to run something that was my own. And at that time, I was starting to talk to the 2 pharmacists that we started the pharmacy with, and that became a reality and allowed me to have something to do. And I also knew that my dad was visiting with his friend Jeff about starting Mastrider Capital. And in conversations with him, I knew that he was wanting this to be something that was a legacy type company for him, something that could house some of his investments and help him organize everything that he had going on. And I approached him and I said, that's what I want to do. I want to be part of helping create the narrative for your legacy. I want to understand what you're doing in the community, and I want to be part of what you're doing. And I felt like I had a skill set that he and Jeff both needed from an organizational perspective and just the day-to-day operations. And they agreed. And I think they've been happy having me as one of their partners.
Okay. The Mastrider, kind of leadership team, there's a lot of there's family there, and then there's like friends. It's like
Sure.
it's like this family, and forgive me if any of this is inaccurate, but there's a lot of like different members of your family who are super good at these like completely different, I think of like Austin
Yes.
and in like the oil and gas arm.
Yes.
And anyway, I'm like, how do you guys navigate that as a family? Like, are you putting different hats on all day long? Like, give me the lay of the land. What are kind of the different areas of Masked Rider? And then, you know, how do you interact as a family and
Sure.
grow this legacy together?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that was something that I early on was really worried about. I think communication is the key, and clear communication can help prevent so much uncertainty and confusion and frustration. And Dad and I think I'd be interested to hear his perspective, but I think we do a good job of being able to communicate with one another. And we can see differently. We can disagree. And there are times where I don't agree with a decision, and we can talk it out, and maybe we end with a solution where I still don't agree, but I'm going to move forward, and we think it's what's best for the firm maybe. And so I think really communication and just being really open and not holding things in, but saying, hey, this is something that concerns me, or this bothers me, or this is why I think we should do this instead of that, helps us a lot. And I think he and I are both pretty good about being able to do that in the office and then go to a tech game together or be at Thanksgiving and not talk about it.
There's a common theme of communicating well, from you watching your dad. They didn't protect you from those conversations. You're not protecting your kids from, the startup conversations. And I think so often when communication isn't clear and intentional, people can assume the worst.
Sure.
And misunderstandings are super easy. And that's one thing I'm taking from this of like, I do want to have more of these conversations in front of my boys when we talk about our business and we talk about our challenges, rather than, around the dinner tables just saying, yeah, it was a hard day, but giving like a little more, exposure to that, so they understand. I really like that. And I couldn't agree more. Like communication, I have multiple partners, and often if we are disagreeing, it's because, one of us doesn't understand the full picture. They can't see the forest through the trees. And if we take time, assume the best, there's trust there. And if you can communicate well as a team, you can solve problems.
Right. And it's funny that we're talking about that because literally 12-ish years of my professional career was putting people to sleep and not talking to them.
Yes. Anesthesiologist, you do not.
Yes. Yeah. But I think a lesson that I learned in medicine, not only did I put people to sleep, but also I literally wrote orders, and still do. Sometimes I'll go help in the OR on a piece of paper that the staff does. And they'll do that and they'll complete their task. But when you have a conversation with you, explain like, hey, we're going to do it this way because of X, Y, and Z, then you allow them to be bought into the plan. You allow them to go on the journey with you. And I think it makes for a much better work environment. And so that's a lesson that I've learned, even though it is great to put people to sleep and they don't talk to you anymore.
Yeah. All right. Count down 1, 2. Yeah. Okay. So paraphrasing what you're saying is, as a leader, if you can help paint the big picture and help your team understand how their role and what they are doing fits into the big picture, you can get buy-in as a team. You can get better understanding. You can unlock creativity.
Yeah.
I like that. Okay. Do you have any other tips or tricks, on the, either from the operating room or at Masked Rider, that you guys use to communicate well and often? Any other tips or tricks that come to mind?
I don't know about tips or tricks, but we try to be very intentional about creating community, and whether that's dinners, happy hours, At the end of every quarter, we try to single out one employee that went above and beyond for a variety of reasons. So really making our people feel appreciated for the work that they're doing for the firm and letting them know that they're part of the team and the things that we're able to accomplish, we could not do if it wasn't for the amazing staff that we have. Our team is just incredible.
Okay. Share you mentioned Seven Brews earlier.
Yeah.
But what's a big win or a memorable win at
Sure.
Masked Rider that you have a good story? Tell me a story.
Oh man. I think our biggest win at Masked Rider Capital up to today has got to be our Seven Brew story.
Okay.
And in September, we had 50 stands open and we merged with a private equity firm out of New York. And, to talk about private equity out of New York, it sounds so scary, but I was so proud of our team. We did not have an investment bank that we contracted with. I mean, we really served as the investment bank. We negotiated. It was a great deal for Masked Rider Capital.
Hang on.
Yeah.
Okay. So for our listeners that are listening to this, typically, there's some kind of brokerage or M&A firm or an
Yes.
investment bank that is coming in and like valuing your business. There's teams of attorneys.
Yes.
They put together this perfectly put together package to then go present and negotiate with these private equity. Okay, so you guys did all of that in-house.
We did.
Okay, keep
We
going.
did.
Keep going.
And, really we were looking, I mean, we had a great group of investors and we were looking for another minority investor to come in for about 10 or $20 million to really get us to where we needed to go, to where the company could fund its own development. Because our goal was to get to opening about 50 stands a year. Well, that's expensive.
Uh-huh.
And, we thought once we got to about 80 to 100 stands, our operations would be able to fund development, but we needed some additional capital. And so we were talking to different groups and this one group that typically takes a minority position, the more we visited with them, the more it became clear that they really wanted a majority stake and it was going to be a great opportunity for us. So yeah, we were the investment bank. We went through the quality of earnings and we put together the pitch decks and we negotiated and we had outside counsel, of course, that helped represent us. But it's a great story because we got a great return for our investors and it really helped Masked Rider Capital in the sense that it was our first large exit. And so it put us on the map. It showed us what we were capable of. And I'm confident that in the next few years, we're going to have an even more amazing story that we're going to be able to tell. But I think that is our biggest win to date.
I love that story because I mean it's an entrepreneur story of like, and I mean this in the best way possible. Like as business owners and entrepreneurs, like there's a bit of like just being ignorant enough to try it, or confident enough, naive enough to like, we're gonna figure it out. Like let's try that, and then you actually go full cycle on something, and then your brain, your horizons are broadened, and you're like, okay, we did that. Now I kind of understand the pieces on the chessboard, and now we can do it again, and we can do it better. We can do it faster.
Yeah.
And for people listening to this, I think just having that courage, as an entrepreneur, having grit, having courage to try something that maybe you've never done, but having the integrity and grit to finish what you start, you're going to learn so much. And you don't have all the answers, and you're never going to have all the answers at the start of a new venture. But
right.
Just going full cycle, you learn so much about yourself, your team, whatever it is that thing is. Like, you're going to learn so much about that. And I admire you guys for having the courage. I mean, obviously, on a pretty big stage with lots of zeros behind that, there's a lot there, but that is fun, and that's a lot of families.
Yeah.
50 stores, and there's 40 employees at every store.
Yeah, I think when we merged in September, we had about 3,200 employees. And I mean, you're exactly right. We didn't really know what we were doing, but we knew we could do it. And we learned a lot about, which we had great development partners. We learned a lot about development site selection, working with banks, and building a team. We built a great executive team over there that has continued to build out their team. And I think being able to bring something like Seven Brew drive-through coffee to Lubbock, and my youngest brother manages a stand. There are students at Texas Tech that work at the stands. It's a great environment. It's a great vibe when you drive through. So it's been fun to bring something like that to our community.
Okay, you wear half a dozen hats, you know, from the pharmacist to, I guess, running a compounding pharmacy to, COO to wife, mom. How do you talk a little bit about that? How do you balance that? How do you decide what gets your energy? We always talk about work-life balance. I'm curious what you would say about that. How do you decide what gets your energy and when?
Sure. Well, I think it depends. We have great leadership at the pharmacy. Our pharmacists in charge are pharmacists that work just as needed. Our techs, they're excellent. And if they weren't excellent, that would be a problem. I don't have to be in that business every day. They're running that business day to day. And Jennifer, the pharmacist in charge, is just magnificent at doing that. And so I get to be removed from that unless we need to go make a decision or build a budget, or, she and I talk every day, but it's not something that I'm having to micromanage because she's excellent at it. Similar at Mashrider Capital, we have an amazing team. But when we were closing the transaction with the private equity out of New York, that took a lot of time. That was a morning call and an afternoon call almost every single day of the week to get that deal closed. And so that took a lot of time, and other things kind of had to go on the back burner. I think so. Different seasons, different businesses require different amounts of time from me. My kids are always top priority. And I think my husband is wonderful. He's been so great, such a great partner through medical school, residency, and now in a career change. And he is so supportive. But he's also one that will put me in check if I need to be. He'll say, "Hey, Brooke, you need to not do that. You need to do this. Or, you need to do this with your kids and not worry about the pharmacy or Mashrider Capital." So, he's been a great partner through all of this too. And he helps me out a lot.
Yeah, I don't believe in work-life balance.
Yeah.
And you described that, but basically, like, there's seasons. It's never in perfect balance. And to steal from earlier, like, communicating that to your kids. Like, your kids aren't dumb, but if you can communicate and it's actually real, you're not making false promises of like, "Hey, I'm sorry, we're busy." It's it's not always going to be like, being honest. I think communicating with your kids, communicating with your spouse of like, "Hey, this is a season. Like, I'm going to need to," my wife and I, we have our, we call it our CFO meetings, but we have a budget meeting every month. And, obviously it's financial, like, okay, what are we going to spend money on this month? But also it's like calendar, like, okay, what is, it is a recipe for disaster if we're like multiple weekends in a row, we're out of town and there's no room to recover.
Right.
And if we're communicating and planning together, February, for whatever reason this year, is like banquet month. Like we have like 4 banquets, and I'm going to something tonight, but just like planning that together and communicating, I think helps alleviate so much of that, because if my wife and I, if we're on the same team, like, there's nothing we can't accomplish.
Sure.
And that's cool that you're able to do that at such a high level in so many different areas. Thinking back, before you started your career, what's a lesson or a piece of advice now that you wish you could go back and tell, your 18, 20-year-old self?
Yeah, I think about this a lot. I think when I was younger, I didn't value relationships as much as I do now. I was very driven in undergrad, getting out early, getting into medical school, getting into a good residency. And I think I undervalued the impact that good relationships can have on your life. And I do think life is all about relationships. And so that's something that if I could go back and tell myself, I'd say, hey, really pour into these people when you're in California for undergrad or you're in Nashville for residency, really take the opportunity to get to know and connect to all the people around you and establish a foundation of relationship that you can carry on with you until, forever. And I don't think I really valued that quite as much because I was just so driven in accomplishing the educational tasks that if I went back, I would try to do better.
Okay. I can relate to, I am a firstborn.
Okay.
Did you ever do Enneagram? Do you know what that is?
Yes, I have.
Are you an Enneagram 3?
Yes.
Yes, I knew it. So am I. And so much of that, like I can relate of like accomplish the task, achieve the thing.
Yes.
Let's we've got something to do. Like I want to do it as efficiently and as well as possible. And, you just put your head down and you get after it. And then you look up and all of a sudden you have no margin for relationships.
Yes.
But, 20 some odd years into my career, I'm like, well, that's everything. When I don't know how to do something, which is often, I need to know who to go call and ask how to do the thing, or, in relationships, that's how you find the answers to the questions that you don't have. And, so much with my family, like as an entrepreneur, like one of the, there's pros and cons for sure. But one of the pros is you get to design your business around your life.
Yeah.
And, if it's a work trip here or there, like, okay, how can I integrate, like bring my family with me? How can I make that fun? How can my business relationships, how can my boys learn from that? How can I benefit all of that? And so, relationships make the world go round.
They do. Yes. And my husband's really good at that. He was a salesman for a long time, and he's very good at that. So I've learned from him too the value of relationships and spending time with people. So,
okay, paint a picture. Last question here. Help paint a picture. What does the future look like for MassRider Capital? What's the vision that you guys have for 5-10 years from now?
Yeah. So we're very opportunistic. We have investments in oil and gas. Of course, we have the quick service restaurant through 7 Brew. I would love to invest in healthcare at some point when we find the right deal. We want MassRider Capital to be a legacy company. We want it to be a company that impacts our community. We aren't really interested in growing companies that are in the Northeast or on the West Coast. We are looking for investment opportunities that provide meaningful impact in our area, in West Texas and outside of West Texas. And so I'm hopeful that in 5 or 10 years, we have you invite me back on this podcast, and I can tell you about other multiple wins that we've had that are similar to our 7 Brew story, where we brought something to the community that was impactful, that was a good return for investors, and that provided an opportunity for young professionals to grow in their career, and we can mentor them.
I love that. That great answer. And I'm not from Lubbock. I grew up in the Metroplex. I, came here as soon as I can. I went to LCU, and the people grow on you. The community grows on you, and people care.
They do.
And that's like, a big reason why we started the business brokerage was, we have all of these, 50% of businesses are owned by boomers, and the youngest of them are 61. And so in the next decade, 50% of our businesses are going to transition in some way.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest inspirations for that is like, if 50% of the businesses in and around Lubbock in West Texas are going to transition in the next decade, like I don't want all of those to be private equity in New York who
roll up strategy.
Yeah. Who doesn't care about, Lubbock and Texas Tech and LCU and the community. Like I want, if we can create an ecosystem where, there's banks that understand it. There's investment firms
Yes.
that get the community. They want the community. They want it to grow. And there's all the business owners that can work together. That's exciting. That's inspiring. And that's like just further, evidence of like, all right, Lubbock's my place.
Yeah. And I think we identified a need in Lubbock that businesses needed capital, and not necessarily from banks or private equity or institutional capital, kind of that middle person, that middle investment firm that could be creative and provide the capital needed to grow business, or like you said, acquire businesses that are ready for an exit, and then take them and grow them and better our community because of it.
That's great. And I am, and I told your dad this when he was on, but I am grateful for y'all's reinvestment into the community like that. I'm sure you guys don't hear that enough from Lubbock Christian School, where my kids go, to Texas Tech, to all over town. People and families reinvesting into our community and caring, giving a crap, matters. And I appreciate it. And I appreciate you coming on the podcast. This is great.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me. This has been really good.
Good. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah.
All right. If you are a business owner and you feel stuck in your business, you feel that your business has plateaued and you don't know how to get to the next level, go to our website, stagcoaching.com. And in the upper right-hand corner, click to book your free consultation. And in your free consultation, we'll give you the next few steps you need to take your business to the next level. It's free, and it's on our website, stagcoaching.com. Thank you, and we'll see you on the next one.